Anyway, welcome to Sunrise Center. For those of you who may not know, we're a nonprofit and we offer a variety of programs in a variety of different topics such as green living, health and wellness, during election times, election integrity issues. We offer classes in compassionate communication that our director, Lori Grace, and I also teach on occasion. And we have a beautiful retreat center, Echo Retreat Center on Maui called Haleakua Garden Farm. And so we often offer programs through there. This weekend we have a couple coming talking about conscious massage and conscious communication. So we're delighted that you're here. The other kind of event that we have here once a month is somebody coming and speaking about their near-death experience. And as many of the speakers we've had would say, it was really not a near-death experience, it was an after-death experience. So we're very delighted and honored to have Ginny Jablonski here as our guest speaker tonight. And please welcome Ginny.
Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation, and that really got me pumped to move forward tonight. I'm really honored to be able to share my experience with you. As many of you probably already know, people who have NDEs go on a journey of discovery to try to figure out what it means and why it happened to them. I'm no different than most people. On my journey, my perspective and belief systems have been challenged on a daily basis. Ultimately, I have found that I resonate with messages of oneness, love, and compassion. In sharing my experience, I do not promote any particular philosophy, as I have made more than a few mistakes on this journey, a few detours, kissed a few frogs. I wouldn't recommend that to everyone. But it was very necessary for me to experience. That these meetings are primarily focused on near-death experiences, but I hope that you will patiently indulge me while I share the events that led up to my death, because I feel that it's important to talk about how my life, behavior, attitudes, and perspectives have changed over the past several years. I'm clearly breaking one of the most important rules of public speaking, which is that I'm reading my comments from paper. And I often speak publicly against the overprescription of opioid medication. My experience with opioids is why I'm reading my presentation to you today. My spontaneous speech, vocabulary, and memory have been altered by the medication. And Rich, I think you experienced that with me. You were asking me questions and I was pausing and looking at my husband for reinforcement. I sometimes forget why I'm even standing in a room. So it can be a little embarrassing. So I know it's embarrassing to read from the paper, but it's more embarrassing to completely forget why I'm standing here in front of a crowd of people. So I'm 52 years old, not enough time to share my life story, and but suffice to say that I've had a lot of challenges, hardships, abuse, loss, and I have experienced profound suffering, as I'm sure most of us have. I've made many mistakes, and I have, prior to my experience, seen the world through a very narrow and narcissistic lens. Strangely, though, I feel that those experiences lend credibility to my story. And it certainly helps me to be more compassionate and tolerant of others every day that I choose to embrace my purpose now. I'd like to start by sharing 2 STEs, or spiritually transformative experiences, that happened to me before my near-death experience. In 1996, when I was 30 years old, I was a passenger on the back of a motorcycle traveling approximately 85 to 90 miles an hour in the fast lane on the freeway in Los Angeles, when my right hand was ripped loose from around the driver's waist. My arm flung around behind the motorcycle, and my entire body was swept into violent turbulence. It was as if my arm and hand were reaching out to the traffic following us. I did not feel fear. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion, and I was surprisingly calm. My head and outstretched hand was facing the black Cadillac behind us, about 15 yards away. I wondered if that is where I would die, slamming into the windshield of the car behind us. I could feel my left hand, which was still gripped around the driver's waist, slipping away from his waist, and my legs and lower body were slowly coming off of the seat. Now, at the time I was wearing a helmet, so if I screamed, there would have been no way for him to hear me. So there was no point. I thought, I'll just let it happen. Out of nowhere, a powerful, invisible force pushed against my back and propelled me forward, back onto the seat, and my right arm flung back around the driver's waist. My hands were once again clasped together, and it was almost as if I had imagined this surreal event. I was sure that no one would ever believe me, and I never spoke of this to the driver or anyone other than my husband until 2014. Speaking of my husband, I wanted everybody to know that that's my husband in the back there. And I thought, it would be fun to have him come and listen to me speak. He hears me speak every day, of course, at home, but not in this capacity. But more than that, I thought, we don't always get to hear from the spouse's perspective what it was like going through these experiences. So I thought it might be interesting in the end, if you had any questions for him, that he might be willing to answer some. Because he's a huge part of my story.
Yeah.
And if it weren't for him, I would not be alive. 2 years after the motorcycle event, I was driving my SUV about 85 miles an hour, probably a little more, in the fast lane on the 10 freeway near San Bernardino, California. My husband called me on the phone, cell phone, probably my first cell phone ever in that time. And while I was on the phone with him, I began to pass out, slowly losing my vision. I dropped the phone as I looked to my right, where I could see an off-ramp about 1/8 of a mile ahead. But there were semi-trucks in each lane to the right of me, stacked in front of one another, leading toward the off-ramp. There was no way I could have accelerated and made it to the off-ramp in front of the semi-trucks. I slowly lost my vision, and I felt myself slump down in my seat. This is just a spiritually transformative experience. When I woke up some 15 to 20 minutes later, we don't remember, I was in a McDonald's parking lot off that off-ramp about 1/4 of a mile away. I called my husband and I told him what happened. We were both really terrified. He was in Los Angeles at the time on the west side, which is about 100 miles away. He drove and picked me up, leaving my car at McDonald's, drove me to Los Angeles, took me to the doctor, where the doctor said, nothing was wrong with you. Just, you're fine, go home. You're getting old, maybe you're sensitive. A little vasovaga. Not that I even at that time knew what that was or really understand it. And they just said, go home, you're fine. We were terrified. We never told anybody else other than the doctor about that event until I started sharing my NDE experience, and people said that spiritually transformative experiences are also important. And I would add that following both of those events, a reasonable person might presume that I found my way to a spiritual bookstore and I bought some sage and crystals or read a dozen books. No. During this time, I was in the midst of completing my training to become an executive protection agent, focusing in the field of personal and physical security for foreign diplomats and their families. In 1998, I was hired by an international private security firm outside of Washington, D.C., owned by President Gerald Ford's daughter, Susan Ford, and her then-husband, Charles Vance, a former member of President Ford's Secret Service detail. I worked for several years and traveled extensively. At 33, I was fit and strong, both mentally and physically, and I loved my job. I frequently stayed at 5-star hotels for months at a time, traveled in chauffeur-driven cars, helicopters, and private planes to many places I had never been before. But it was physically demanding and at times very stressful. In 2000, I began to notice that I did not have as much energy as I used to. I began to skip early morning runs and weightlifting sessions with colleagues who were former military and specialized law enforcement personnel. I also began experiencing pain in almost all of my joints, and my bones ached. It was not long before the aches turned into debilitating pain. As soon as I had some time off, I sought out a highly respected rheumatologist from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Beverly Hills. During the first consultation with this doctor, I was seated in his office after he examined and interviewed me extensively. He casually stated that he felt I was a, air quotes, typical type A person who had simply burned out and needed some time off. As you might imagine, I was more than a little insulted by what I perceived to be an ill-considered accusation, not a diagnosis. After all, I was there because I really wanted a diagnosis. I wanted him to fix me. I wanted him to send me back to work. As he said this to me, he handed me a prescription for hydrocodone. Mm-hmm. I exclaimed, "No, I can't take that. I carry a gun and I drive a car." More importantly, I had a significant level of concern that I would be disqualified from working and carrying a gun, as I was one of the few women in California who had been issued a concealed weapons permit. I remember that conversation vividly, and I remember feeling humiliated and desperate. The doctor quickly pointed out the window of his office and admonished me in a matter-of-fact tone, "More than 80% of LA is driving around on more medication than this." Once again insulted, I responded that I did not feel that was good enough reason for me to take drugs, and I really just wanted to find out what was wrong with me. That is why I was there. I needed a diagnosis, and more importantly, a cure. By mid-2001, I was forced to retire from my career due to debilitating pain and fatigue. As the years passed by, so did multiple misdiagnoses and a litany of non-narcotic prescription medications, which continued to deteriorate my overall quality of health significantly. One of the medications I was on is methotrexate. If you know anything about that, I was on that for, I think, more than 12 months. It is very, very harsh medication. All the while, I tried to be as productive as possible. I served several nonprofits, writing grants, serving as an officer on the boards. I frequently lobbied local, state, and federal officials. I advocated for children with learning disabilities and supported their parents. and I started a quilting program for women in our local county jail, making quilts for charity. In San Bernardino County, Glen Helen is a rehabilitation center. Pain had not yet taken away my strong will or desire to be of service. I tried to remain positive and hopeful that I would be cured and return to work. During this time, I also rescued former race and performance horses, professionally rehabbing them to be rehomed or keeping them if another career was not possible. I always enjoyed horses and found great comfort in their company. Eventually, however, I was no longer able to care for my own horses, and I had to place one of them in a nearby sanctuary. By July 2009, after multiple misdiagnoses, my rheumatologist announced he had given up trying to find the cause of my symptoms. He handed me a fentanyl lollipop, stating that this was my only remaining option. Believing there was no other option to treat my chronic pain, I wearily accepted the lollipop and a prescription for 25 microgram fentanyl patches. Fentanyl, by the way, is 100 times stronger than heroin.
Oh.
It is anesthetic. By this time, my husband sometimes carried me to the bathroom and helped me dress myself. He has sacrificed years of potential advancement in his career in order to work from home and care for me. He would prepare 3 meals a day and bring them to me and come back and get the dirty dishes. He did the grocery shopping, cleaned the house, worked a full-time job, took care of me, he did everything. Over 4 years, my doctor increased the dosage of fentanyl, and the quality of my life further declined. In August of 2013, a month before my NDE, I had another STE, or spiritually transformative experience. This happened at an equine sanctuary where I volunteered grooming horses and donkeys for quite some time, the same sanctuary where I had placed our horse. I turned around and about a dozen horses were standing side by side in a perfect semicircle.
Whoa.
Do you remember in old Western movies where the Native Americans would dramatically line up like this, sending a message? It seemed to me as if I was suddenly part of a ceremony, or at least some sort of a meeting was taking place and they had something very important to say. I stood there silent for some time, staring at the horses. They were just staring back at me. They weren't saying anything, or so it seemed. Eventually, I went on my way, and believing no one would ever believe what happened, I did not tell my husband or anyone about the incident again until I started sharing my NDE. In hindsight, there was a lot happening in those few moments with the horses, but I had no idea then what they were trying to communicate to me. Again that August, my doctor and I were contemplating increasing the dosage of fentanyl yet again from 112 to 125 micrograms. I questioned the new dosage relative to my then weight of 115 pounds. My doctor replied, "Don't worry, I have surgeons and judges on more medication than this." I thought to myself, did that man really just say, "Don't worry, I have surgeons and judges on more medication than this"? Because I promise you, my judgment was impaired.
Yes.
I no longer drove a car.
Surgeons.
Years ago, I had stopped driving at night because I saw things that weren't there, and I tried to turn onto streets that didn't exist. Eventually, a long time before this, I stopped driving in the day. And my husband would take time, all of his vacation time, he was never able to take a vacation during this time. All of his vacation time was chauffeuring me back and forth to the doctor, right? It's amazing. I mean, many people comment most marriages do not outlive. I thought to myself regarding the medication, I have surgeons and judges. Does that mean that there might be a surgeon operating on somebody's child right now on 125 because your judgment, I'm here to tell you, your judgment is impaired when you are on fentanyl, no matter how low the dose.
Right. Interesting.
And further, judges
Yeah.
are adjudicating. It's okay, judges are adjudicating court cases. I mean, that wasn't as reassuring to me as I think the doctor intended it to be.
Right.
You know, I didn't think, oh, thank God, people with cultural authority like JDs and PhDs have paved the way for me to blindly follow them off a cliff to a potential opioid overdose. And I had no idea how close I was to that opioid overdose. But I thought it.
Yeah.
But I still left his office with an increased prescription because my pain levels were fluctuating from a 7 to a 9. And now that I know a lot more about these pain medicines, it's very clear that the pain medicine help you to feel more pain.
Yeah.
They alter your brain. A short time after that, I was speaking to someone who could read auras. I believe she was a psychic and an animal communicator. Not being a very spiritual person at the time, I knew nothing of auric fields. I never heard of an auric field, or energy, and nor did she know anything about me. She told me that my auric field was very porous, and she asked my permission, of course. And she told me that it reminded her of someone who was on narcotic medication and very close to death. To my surprise, I found myself confiding in her that I recently thought I heard horses talking to me. I told her that I thought my horse had shared a vision with me, and it was accompanied by a strong sense of emotion. It was a memory of he and I working together on our ranch, and I felt overwhelming sense of partnership and oneness and gratitude. Of course, I didn't share that with anybody at the time. I had no idea what it meant, and I asked her if she had ever heard of anything like that, because I never heard of anything like that before. She shared that this phenomenon was common with people who were in hospice and close to death,
Oh my God.
and that I might seriously consider preparing myself for that eventuality. Shortly after that, in September 2013, the night before my 47th birthday, which was September 3rd, so I just turned 52 a few days ago, I took
Happy
an...
birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you, sir.
Call me Henry.
Thank you, Henry. I took an 8 milligram Dilaudid in addition to my fentanyl. Now, the doctors call that breakthrough pain. You know, and I was always afraid of the fentanyl. I didn't want to keep upping the dose, so they gave me Dilaudid in addition. But the Dilaudid went from 2 milligram to 4 milligram to now, with the last prescription, 8 milligram. And I have to say, my pain was legitimate. I wasn't making it up, and I also wasn't addicted to the medicine, but because I don't have whatever it medically is required to be considered addicted, but your body builds up a tolerance to the medicine as well. Your brain creates new circuitry for receiving pain, and you just build up a tolerance. So with opioids, it's a slippery slope. You just will take more and more and more until you die. And the doctors know that. I remember going to sleep around 11 o'clock, and I was lying in bed and I felt as if someone was touching my shoulders and my ankles. I was instantly transported out of my body and surrounded by light. It seemed to be an open space with no visible floor, walls, or ceiling. There was a large deciduous tree with green leaves and a man that looked like Jesus. He had shoulder-length brown hair. He was wearing a white, what looked to be linen, robe with a navy blue tunic over top, and it seemed like a very simple rope for a belt. Considering my circumstances, I was very left-brained. I didn't question the setting, and I readily accepted that I was standing in front of Jesus. Not being very religious, I don't remember experiencing any emotions other than relief that it was finally over. In the background, off to the left behind the tree, I was aware of a group of beings that seemed angelic in nature, but I was not sure of who they were or why they were there. People often talk about angels or family members coming to meet you, and I can't say. They never came close enough for me to identify them. The man who looked like Jesus held his hand out to me and told me that I had suffered enough and that my life had come to an end. I somehow intuitively knew that it was my choice to make. For a brief moment, the idea of leaving my life was very tempting. But I somehow felt as if there was something important I had to accomplish. And ironically, I was concerned about leaving my husband. I actually questioned who would take care of him. Pretty ironic. Then I thought I heard a noise, and I turned around and I saw the donkeys and horses from the sanctuary where I volunteered. The donkeys were braying loudly, and the horses were rearing and whinnying as if to say, "Don't go. We told you. Don't go." That gives me chills. Wow. I turned back and looked at Jesus, pointed over to the animals and said, "Sorry, Jesus, I'm going with them." At exactly 1:30 a.m., I awoke dramatically, gasping for breath and screaming over and over that I had just died. My lungs filled with air. It felt as if they were on fire. And it also felt as if someone were sitting on my chest. So because this didn't happen in a hospital, and I was never clinically declared dead, people say to me, "Well, how do you know that you were dead?" And that description that I just shared says to me that there was no air in my lungs. And this makes me go back to the day that I mentioned when I was in Beverly Hills and my rheumatologist said, "Here's the fentanyl lollipop." I came home. I was still driving at that time. And I gave the lollipop to my husband because we were always taught, we spoke for 7 or 8 years about me not taking narcotics, not taking opioids. And I said, "This is what the doctor wants me to take." And he read the label and he got on the FDA website on the internet and he looked at me very seriously and he says, "Honey, this medicine can trick your brain into forgetting to tell your lungs to breathe. You could die. If you take this medicine, you could die." And I just cried and I fell into his arms and I just said, "But there's no other choice." At this point, I just had no other choice. As I was screaming that I had just died, of course, I woke my husband up from a sound sleep, who, by the way, works and, needed his sleep. And he asked me what was wrong, and I told him I thought I just died. And he said, "Well, if you're okay right now, can we talk about this in the morning?" So the following morning, we had a lengthy discussion about my experience the night before. I exclaimed that I wasn't ready to die. Not yet anyway. Because I felt I had something important to do. I just had no idea what it was. I knew, though, that I had to discontinue the fentanyl. I wanted to live, and I had no idea where to start. My doctors offered no help. In fact, they did not recommend discontinuing medication, stating that none of their patients had ever gotten off of opioids.
Oh, Lord.
They said that they had had one, his direct quote, I believe, is, "I've had one or two," and he has thousands and thousands of patients, "one or two who have decreased the dosage slightly, but none who never have gotten off." And it was against medical advice that I was doing so. I was very lucky to have the emotional and financial support of my husband, because I had given up on medical doctors and had nowhere else to turn, and all other options were self-pay. There's no health insurance for any alternative, almost no alternative care. To complicate things further, after this experience, I began to see various types of energy and colors around all living things. I was able to hear trees and plants and insects and animals and other people telepathically communicate, although I don't think in the beginning that people intended to communicate with me. I would hear their random thoughts. Sometimes that wasn't always fun. You learned a little bit more about people than you want, especially when you're driving on the freeway. And I say to my husband, "Hey, that guy's cheating on his wife in that car." There's interesting. Later on, I came to understand the energy that I was seeing were called chakras and subtle bodies and meridians and 40 miles of nervous system in the human body. I could see the nerve change from green to red when there are trapped emotions in the nerves. And a few years ago, scientists recently discovered something called a soliton wave, which they identify as frequency. These different the different waves. You can measure it. I'm not sure if it's an oscilloscope or just some sort of high-tech microphone that they can measure the frequency of the wave, and they all make different sounds. And what the scientists were really puzzled by was that there could be more than one traveling in the same direction or traveling in opposite directions, and they don't affect one another. They're just happily cruising along. And they call this wave the soliton, S-O-L-I-T-O-N wave. What's really interesting, and I just discovered this in February of this year when I went to an equine chiropractic seminar with a chiropractor by the name of Dr. Jay Kumaric. There's a documentary about him called Life Adjusted, available on Vimeo. He offered a little spiral-bound book with his course. And on page 4, it said General Systems Theory. And I got all excited. And I turned the page, and there's a picture of a nerve, and it says soliton wave. And I'm reading, and all of a sudden I get to the point where it says, and under the microscope, when this wave is present, the nerve changes from a liquid green to a very dense and rigid red color. And I jump up with the book and I scream, oh my gosh, this is what, in front of 8 doctors. They thought I was nuts. But I can see the trapped emotion, the trapped memory, that this is the distortion that causes false signals to be sent to the brain, so that the brain then sends false instructions to the motor neurons that receive the signal as to how to react. Amazing. Honestly, this did scare me quite a bit, and I really didn't talk to anybody about it. From time to time, I would say something to my husband, but my husband went to Caltech. My husband went to UCLA. He has dual degrees in engineering and computer science. He was not likely to believe me when I said I was hearing animals talk. Also, hearing voices is something that they usually diagnose you for and send you to the hospital, and I didn't want to be put in a straitjacket. I did fear at that point that maybe I was crazy, and I think that's also very common with people with NDEs. You know, we think, oh, we're the only ones that this has ever happened to. You go traveling around the world and visit all these sacred sites and read all these books until you figure out thousands of other people, tens of thousands of other people have had, and you find your family, you find your tribe, you know. I also was hearing voices from people that had crossed over, and I didn't realize that until I would hear something and there was no plant, no animal, and no other person around. So that was also something that I really didn't want to share with my husband right away. And for those of you that recently came in, that's my husband in the back row. I also seem to know things about other people for no reason. I would sometimes be aware of events that hadn't happened yet. And I seem to know when someone was not being truthful. That also can be quite a burden. Teenage daughter, not so much very helpful, but friends or other people, especially out in the world, sometimes hard to handle. It was all quite crazy making, and I wasn't about to tell anybody all of it, not even my husband at the time. At the time, I wasn't willing to tell my husband, and my husband is still my same husband. I desperately wanted to understand what I was seeing and hearing, and more important, why it was happening to me. And again, I think a lot of us have that same struggle. Of course, one of the things that I was worried about as well is this a side effect of the medication? And if it was, then that was also not good. In my desire to discontinue the medication and regain my health, I eagerly pursued just about any complementary therapy I discovered. I had no previous knowledge, or exposure to anything non-traditional whatsoever. We had put all of our faith in allopathic medicine. I was willing to try anything because I wanted to live, and I tried quite a number of treatments. I asked everyone I talked to what they recommended for healing, and if they had visions or heard voices. That didn't go over so well. So eventually I settled on just asking if they had read books or had heard of healing modalities or what religions had they studied. I went to an alternative bookstore one day and I came home with about 30 books. I bought crystals and sage and frankincense and a drum, and I had no idea what to do with it, but it seemed really cool and everybody else was really into it. So I thought, you know, at least the crystals were supposed to heal you. At the recommendation of others, I spent thousands of dollars on supplements and tinctures, and quite frankly, I rarely ever took them. I have always felt somehow deep inside of me that my healing would come from within me and not a supplement. So I would take them for a couple of days. I worked with a local physical therapist who was also an energy worker. I would lie on a table for an hour while he moved his hands above my body. His eyes were shut most of the time, and he never said a word. I did this once a week, sometimes twice, for about 6 months until I realized nothing was happening. I discovered telesummits, downloads, and webinars, and I bought them all. I consulted with people who charged $300 to $500 an hour. Some I could even spend the day with for $1,000. I was overwhelmed with the flurry of information being hurled at me, but I was a sponge and I wanted more. I studied religion and philosophy and I listened to lecture after endless lecture on love and light. I remained relentless in my pursuit, and I admit from time to time I went off into the weeds a little bit. I got psychic readings, angel readings, past life readings, and regressions. There was clearly a lot wrong with me, which everyone was very eager to point out. Many of the religious and healing philosophies conflicted, and everyone seemed certain they were right.
Yeah.
Remember, I had come to this game very late. I had not spent my time wisely, slowly discovering what Dharma and mindfulness were, and I certainly never heard of Dr. Bruce Lipton or epigenetics. In January 2014, I received a channeled message from a trusted friend of a friend who was a psychic medium that I was going to be a great healer and that I would heal many, many thousands of people. This encouraging message alone propelled me forward. Now I had a significant reason to heal. This was no longer just about me. That information was very motivating indeed. More than anything, I truly wanted everyone to be healed. I had always been greatly affected by the suffering of others, often feeling their physical pain. I soon realized that I had been an intuitive empath all my life, but I had no idea what that meant. When you spend your entire life denying your deepest truth, it takes quite a while to shift your perspective, forgive yourself and others, and overcome the programming of self-doubt. Throughout the chaos, I found myself gravitating toward two books. Change Your Aura, Change Your Life by Barbara Martin, and Illuminata, A Book of Prayers by Marianne Williamson. Change Your Aura, Change Your Life had exercises, intentions, and prayers that spoke to interpersonal relationships, past life energies, focusing on forgiveness, and clearing emotions such as anger and jealousy. It was complex and required time and dedication, but I was motivated to unlock my spiritual power, as the book suggested. I carried the book and index cards with handwritten notes with me everywhere, and I pulled them out during conversations to share them with people when it was appropriate. Every once in a while, I would accidentally drop the book, and 30 or 40 index cards would go flying everywhere. Illuminata, which I have here with me today, is a compassionate collection of original pairs for the earth, humanity, victims, children, war, Holocaust victims, Native Americans, African Americans, etc.
I can't talk right now.
The book spoke to my heart in a deeply profound way. I read through the nearly 300-page book of prayers, putting sticky notes on the ones that spoke to me. Every night, for more than 6 months, I called my horses to me in spirit, and we prayed together for 30 minutes as I read 5 or 6 prayers out loud for humanity and, of course, for myself. And I showed you, if anybody wants to see the book later, I'm happy to share it. I also wrote prayers on my own, stating my intention to be of service to both people and animals, as well as the desire to find a group of people who would understand and support me on my path. If you believe in the law of attraction, without even knowing it at the time, I was manifesting my future every waking moment. Slowly but surely, my life began to change. At first, I met people through Facebook groups or online discussions and meetups. I traveled and participated in groups, and my husband drove me to Phoenix twice a month for meetings for about a year. That was a 2-hour drive there and a 2-hour drive back. just so that I could be around like-minded people, learning from each other and sharing our experiences. These new relationships led me down new paths and to new understandings, people, and healing modalities. I was on a mission to heal myself and to understand why this was all happening to me. There had to be a purpose, a reason for all of the hardship that I had endured in my life. I began to realize there was a profound reason why I had been given these gifts. By mid-2015, I was openly sharing these truths with others and well on my way to realizing that something very special was happening to me as I healed. Things that were confusing to me began to make sense, and things that had been oversimplified, such as people saying things like attracts like, were revealed as being much more complex and profound than I had ever realized. The energy I felt and could see began to make sense as I read and learned from others about chakras, colors, and subtle bodies. One very helpful book was Louise Hay's Heal Your Body. In it, she outlines the correlation between parts of the body, emotions, and personal beliefs. This book, among too many to mention here, can also be very helpful. During this time, I traveled to Australia and visited Ayers Rock in Uluru. I had come to believe that I had a significant life there and felt as if I needed to resolve some energies. While there, I met an Aboriginal woman through a friend who was a talented psychic and energy healer. She taught me more about the significance of past lives than I had learned in a year. Many people I had found and paid a lot of money to could tell you all about them, but no one ever talked about resolving them. Apparently, there was a much greater purpose to accessing this knowledge. It wasn't just anecdotal information for entertainment's sake. And much of what had been shared with me over the past year all began to fall into place. I saw patterns and themes emerging, and this was very helpful indeed. When I came home, I worked with a shaman and eventually met an amazing Native American elder from the Shoshone tribe. His name was Blue Thunder. He became a close friend and mentor. I studied with him for quite a time until he eventually passed away from an aggressive form of cancer that surprised us all. I learned so much about the earth, nature, and the connectedness of all life from the perspective of his traditions and ancestors. He was well educated and traveled and studied extensively across the globe to remote sites where he had access to rare texts and prophecies. I cannot begin to express the importance of having this man in my life. The deep understanding he brought me and the ways in which he contributed to my willingness to embrace my abilities and heal myself were immeasurable. It is important to note that by January 2015, I was able to completely break free of all prescription medication except for migraine medication. I still continue to have migraines for several years. By this time, many of the healers I had previously worked with were calling me for input or asking me to work with their clients on a fairly regular basis. Through my many travels, I had amassed clients in about a dozen countries and kept quite busy 6 days a week sharing everything I had learned on my journey. I frequently tell people that I believe everyone has these abilities, but not everyone has to die to recognize them. Sometime in late 2016, while working with people, I began to notice that people's animals, dead or alive, would come in to bring them messages or information. It seemed to be happening much more frequently, and it took me a while to realize that I had completely forgotten the experience I had with the horses during my NDE. I was so wrapped up in my own healing that I had forgotten. When I energetically went back into that experience, though, I felt so much more than I did that day. and realized they were attempting to share quite a bit of information that I was unaware of at the time. Around that time, I resolved that I would begin working with animals, as they always seemed to offer healing for their humans and frequently shared profound insights. Over time, I have transitioned into working with animals about half the time and have continued to educate myself extensively in animal and equine specific healing modalities. When I work with humans, it is often to help those who want to become healers or who already are to develop their unique skills and clear blocks. There is so much more to share and so many details that I have left out. Excuse me. But as my time is limited, I would like to share with you some of the many important books I found helpful on my journey, among many too numerous to mention today. Dr. Bruce Lipton's The Biology of Belief. The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And The Emotion Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson. Very profound. Also, if you haven't heard of the New German Medicine, there's a German doctor by the name of Reich, R-Y-K-E, Geerd, G-E-E-R-D, Hammer. He was an oncologist in Germany who had 20,000 cancer patients that he studied, and they all fell into similar categories. Every similar kind of cancer, every single one of them had a related or similar unresolved emotional trauma associated with it. Due to the efficacy of his research, he was kicked out of Germany and relocated in Europe, where he's now working with a group of 100 doctors, and they are all repeating his research and studying. They're all oncologists, and they're all trying to repeat and see what their results are. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody
Just
has.
say his name again.
Reich, R-Y-K-E,
Uh-huh.
Geerd, G-E-E-R-D, Hammer, H-A-M-M-E-R.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm sorry that you guys came in a little late. We can maybe talk later about a couple of things that happened before.
How do you spell it? Geared again? G.
G-E-E-R-D.
Ham.
And I think they've changed the syntax of the names. It's either the New German Medicine or the German New Medicine. I think they did make a shift in that. And my husband is here also, if anybody wants to ask him any questions.
I wanted to know, when you do, half the time you're working with the horses and the times that you are working with people, are you accessing what needs to be cleared in relationship to past lives, if that's something that comes up? I mean, you said you learned about your past life with some of the healers, but there's another level of what pattern needs to be known. Is that just say a little bit about what aspect of healing you're doing when you work with individuals, if you can.
Yes, I studied many different healing modalities, most of which I have pretty much walked away from. I believe very much that a healer is someone who sparks within you the remembrance that you can heal yourself. I feel very strongly that forgiveness is the most important healing that we can offer ourselves or others. When I work with people and horses, it's very similar, because I believe that horses and human souls are very similar. We all have past lives. We all take on false beliefs. We all have unresolved trauma. We all have experienced very traumatic death. And all of that affects us in our current life. And it is no more true for humans than it is for animals.
And so when you work with people, they gain some insights about like what direction to move in for their own understanding and insight. Is that?
Yes, because of my experiences, I don't always spend a lot of time saying or identifying, the time period and
Right.
what their name was and who in their current
Right.
family was in the life and all of that. What I prefer to focus on is, well, I think it's important to say that I don't work in a way that is my preference. What I always ask is that the priority of the soul be made known to me. So it coincides with my preference in that the soul will say, we don't really need to know what these things are, we just need to know that it exists, and if it exists and you believe that it exists, would you want to let that go? If the soul tells me that there's something a little more, there's something very deep here, there's something a little, I'm sorry, again, spontaneous speech and opioids.
No problem.
Oftentimes, there are lifetimes that have been patterns where, let's say, for example, we're women. A lot of women experience multiple divorces. I'm not saying that men don't also, but if I were working with a woman, the woman might say, I've had 4 husbands and they've all died, or I've had 4 husbands and I've had 4 divorces. What is that pattern, and what is the disconnect between the masculine and the feminine? Or what is it with me in a past life where I am in unforgiveness of myself because maybe I wronged a man, and so now I feel as if I need to suffer at the hands of a man. It can be very, very, very complex.
Yes.
So it is. I feel it has been one of the most important things that I have worked with in clearing these types of energies. I get feedback from people that they experience very profound shifts, and there are many, many, many people who do this work.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Is it okay if I share the book with you?
Please.
This is a fun little book of prayers, and I had said that I went through and I read, this is just actually the actual book that I use, and I went through and I put Post-it, I never thought anybody would see it, and put Post-it notes on, and as I said, I would, I had committed to myself that I would pray for 30 minutes every night before I went to bed, and I chose 4 or 5 of these prayers, and I would read them for every night for about 6 months. And one night I just didn't feel called to do it anymore, and within months, most of the prayers for myself, in terms of transforming my life, began to be answered. I asked for friends, I asked for support, I asked for guidance, and it all started to fall right into place. So I really find that for me, this book was a turning point for me.
Beautiful.
But it was after you stopped that it all started falling into place?
Right, and it was more than 6 months. It was, I don't remember exactly it was about 6.5 months, and then I just didn't feel compelled to do it anymore. And it was with true humility that I was praying for the whole world to be healed, not only myself. And I do feel that that was a key component as well. That I wasn't just looking for myself to be healed or to win the lottery or something for myself. I really truly was empathetic and very concerned about all the suffering.
Yeah.
When you hear plants and insects and things like that, what kinds of messages or what are they saying? Is it consistent, or what are you getting?
I'm not one that gets these very lengthy philosophical lectures. I don't tend to channel that type of information.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually a brief uplifting message or some piece of very profound, a little nugget, like something you might think we could quote Gandhi or Buddha or, Tennyson or Hemingway. Just a little nugget. Remember this, this is important. Don't lose sight of this, little things. I don't tend to get, I don't speak that way either, so probably in line with my personality and my lexicon. which has suffered from the opioid use.
Plus it's easier to
But
remember.
you can feel that it's from,
I know right away which animal or tree or bug or what. I can be standing in a herd of 20 horses, and I do a lot because I volunteer at rescues quite often. And people will say to me, well, we're going to be, one of our horses is going to be adopted. And his best friend here is this other horse. So now he's going to be alone. And I have 40 horses here. Who should I put in with him? And I'll point, just like boom, I'll know exactly what horse. And I'll say why this is their favorite horse and what has been their relationship. And 9 times out of 10, it's, oh, he used to be in the stall with this horse. They used to be stallmates or next to one another. And so I can't say how I know that. I just know it. I don't hear things and then repeat them or receive instructions. It's a knowing. It's a direct knowing, and I just go there.
Beautiful. Interesting.
Well, I think we're, oh, yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Pennsylvania. Would you like to know a little bit about my?
A little bit, yes.
I don't know who my father is. I didn't have a very kind mother. She was supposed to give me up for adoption, and someone in the family talked her out of it, and I think she regretted that every day of my life, and she pretty much let me know that I was the source of all of her problems. And there was a lot of abuse, a lot of suffering, a lot of physical abuse. She left me to the devices of men in our family, and I suffered a lot of sexual abuse and rape at an early age. So at some point she sent me to family and didn't buy a return ticket, and the family had no choice but to keep me, and they very much resented it, and I knew that constantly. I was constantly reminded of that. For Christmas, I literally got underwear and a comb one year. So it wasn't a very special life. When I was young, though, I remember being about 3 years old, and in my mind thinking about the adults around me. I don't think I'm ever going to treat a child like that when I grow up. It was as if I was mapping out all the things I wouldn't do when I grew up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then when I was about 16, my family didn't want me anymore. So I moved out to Los Angeles, and I got a job as, I don't know what you would call it, just an assistant or a clerk in a law firm. And in California, we're in California now, right? We're in California, the state, the civil code, the state code, you could fill in 2 of these windows with the law books, right? And so I would be in the mailroom, and all the pages that were the updated laws would come in, and I would put the pages into the book and throw out the old pages, and that was my job. And that was in like 1985 or 1984 or 1985. And then eventually, I worked in Beverly Hills on Wilshire Boulevard at 83 Wilshire Boulevard. And there was a little note in the cafe on the first floor that somebody needed a receptionist / data entry clerk. And I responded to that. And about 10 years later, after taking that job, I worked my way up to be the financial controller of the company. But then when I married my husband, remember you said I could do anything I wanted, it was up to me. And I was very unhappy in my job because I felt there was a glass ceiling and that there was a good old boys network, and they wanted to, hire their rich friends' sons who could fly helicopters, and, they could commute back and forth between Santa Barbara and LA with their family and friends just flying helicopters around. They were a pretty wealthy lot, and I felt that I would never really be able to get ahead because at the time I didn't have a degree. So my husband said, quit and go back to school, and that's what I went back to school, and believing that I was going to major in economics. And as I was attending school, I also had a hobby, being from Pennsylvania, I shot, and we, you know, my whole family, there was a lot of shooting, a lot of hunting, a lot of archery and that type of thing. And so I was a competition shooter. It was pretty much the only hobby I had. And during that is when I became familiar with the people in law enforcement and security, and I was recruited, and so I dropped out of school and went into protection.
Yeah.
What, I walked in right when you were talking about was it an accident with the freeway with the,
Mm-hmm.
you were forced off the freeway, it was just like an accident, right? It was like everything just happened all at once?
No, I was driving my car in the fast lane,
Yeah.
and I started to pass out, and
You just started passing out?
I started passing out as I was driving. I was on the phone with my husband, and I dropped the phone, and you get tunnel vision, and your vision just sort of goes away. And I could see that there was an off-ramp, but there were 3 semi-trucks stacked up to the right of me and in the way of my getting to the off-ramp. So there would have been no way for me to be able to get to the off-ramp. And I woke up about 15 to 20 minutes later and picked my cell phone up off the floor of the car and called my husband back, and that's when he drove from Los Angeles to pick me up because we were terrified.
Wait, did the car crash?
No.
Or you just ended up in the McDonald's?
I just woke up in the McDonald's parking lot.
So you don't know what happened, you just
I
passed
have no
out?
idea.
No, when I tell psychic people the story, they say they see an angelic hand reach down, pick up the car, and move it over.
Yeah.
I don't have a memory of that. My body has a memory of an accident, that there was an accident. So I don't know.
Different timeline.
Is
But
that-
the
Yeah.
car was fine, there was
The
no.
car was fine.
Yeah.
I was perfectly fine.
Gosh.
I have no explanation, but that's what we would consider a spiritually transformational
Very,
experience.
very,
I
yeah.
would agree. Go ahead.
What was that what led to the pain? That if they showed up
No.
later?
The pain, so I found out after I started coming down off of medication and doing complementary medicine, someone had asked, have you ever been tested for Lyme disease? Sure enough, the PTSD from my job, because you work 14, 16 hours a day, you exercise with military men, highly specialized, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, you know, you name it. And the PTSD brought out, it stressed the immune system and brought the Lyme forward.
Right.
I also have a few rheumatological conditions, arthritis, and degenerative disc and joint disease.
So you're saying that you, in your life, you went through a lot of physical challenge in that line of work, and eventually, and then what these other conditions led you to the point where you were physically suffering? Is that
Yes,
is that what you're saying?
yes,
And that's what led you to start taking the medication?
yes, because there were years of misdiagnosis. Oh, you have MS. Oh, you have lupus. Oh, you have ankylosing spondylitis. Oh, you know, we're not really sure what you have. Why don't you just take methotrexate? You know, and it just got so frustrating. They wanted to say that I had fibromyalgia, but I didn't. It didn't hurt if you touched my body. It only felt like my bones were going to explode from the inside out. That's the best I can describe. Pain, such an excruciating pain. It just felt like the long bones in my legs and arms were I can't even begin to describe.
And that was Lyme's?
Well, that's the theory now,
Yeah.
because when I have a blood test now some people would argue that the tests aren't that accurate, but my blood tests now show that I at one time had Lyme and it is no longer active.
Wow.
So,
Yay.
I just have a bunch of questions if it's,
Oh,
if it's
please.
okay with.
sure.
Well, I have one.
Go ahead.
So the healing was, you're mostly attributing your healing and being able to get off of your opioids to a spiritual, an intentional, an energetic spiritual thing, right? Were you also doing herbs? Were you, I mean, were you doing any other kinds of therapy, or, you know?
I did very little else. I bought products, but I never used them.
Right.
I mostly did energy work. And as I would go to energy healers, I would walk out and go, I can do what they do, but I'm not really sure they're doing it right.
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
Right.
And then I went to so many different kinds of healers and studied so many different philosophies that the common threads through it all began to show me a much larger perspective, and I became pretty effective in helping people to remember that we all can heal ourselves. It's inside of us. We don't have to keep looking for greatness outside of ourselves, because it's inside of all of us. The only problem is it's covered up with all the junk we believe we need to get from outside to make ourselves better.
Yeah.
So when you unload the trunk, there's the divinity. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Careful. Go ahead.
Trade you.
Mm-hmm.
Trade off.
What?
Trade off.
Yeah.
I'll go, you go, I'll go, whoever
No,
else
I'm-
goes.
I'm done.
No, no, hey, you've got more, just bring it. But I just curious about, and where do you live now?
Prescott, Arizona,
Got it. And you're,
outside of Prescott.
and you're off of almost all medication now, just a little, what was the, did I hear that?
The only medicine I take is sumatriptan, which is a vasodilator for when I have, it's not a technically migraine pain, but that's the medicine that you take when you have you can only describe as a migraine, severe pain in the brain, chronic inflammation in the brain.
When you said about the past lives connecting, is it your experience, I was trying to understand, I got a sense of what you said, I was trying to understand, is it your experience that like there's an accumulation, or there's just like an ancestry or an evolution of, I don't know, call it karma? Like, who knows, 10 lives ago you were this, you were that, and the next thing, and you lived, you died, you this, and some energy essence, I don't know what it is, shows up here in the person now. Is that, am I getting that right?
All of the above, everything you just said, yes.
So it's not like there's a like a, does it fit in with some of the religion, you know, like the Eastern religions talk about like this long, you know, train of karma, and maybe eventually you might complete it. I don't know. Or like, you know, you die, you come back again, you know.
Well,
Keep coming back.
the underlying premise there, I think really simply is that karma was supposed to exist. My sense, in having worked with a lot of people, is that karma doesn't have to exist. But there will be people who would just fisticuffs with me if I said that.
Yeah.
If you said what?
That they would go fisticuffs with me if I
For
said
saying-
that.
Karma doesn't
For-
exist.
That karma doesn't exist.
It
doesn't
exists.
have to
It doesn't.
Uh-huh.
It exists only when we judge ourselves
Mhm.
to be wrong and hold ourselves in unforgiveness.
Wow.
That's my experience. Now,
a good one.
but I also have to be very careful because this is an IANS meetings, and in
Yeah.
IANS we are not supposed to promote any particular, you know, so when I say these things, this is my experience.
Yes.
You know, and I think it's really important. I never tell people who come to me as clients, oh, it's my way or the highway, you know, don't go to, you know, I always say,
Okay.
go to as many quote unquote healers, talk to as many people, and find what works for you. Because we're all on a journey, and we may not be all at the same place. We may not be ready to hear these things. Maybe next year, maybe in 5 years, maybe not this lifetime.
Well, I would like to encourage you to let those pearls that you have come across be expressed, and know that the context is open for that. So
It's not preachy.
yeah, I mean that
Beautiful.
was good. Thank
So-
you.
So now I have one. I kind of asked this before, but I kind of would like to take another pass at it. So when you're working with people and you were talking about karma and that there's a buildup, and now you're saying your view of it is that the realization and self-forgiveness has the potential for real clearing of this karma and repeated patterns. Is there anything else that you could share other than the self-forgiveness as you work with people that you've found that has had a pretty thorough and completion opportunity for people that are stuck and going in cycles and cycles? What else have you said or done that points people in a direction that allows a liberation of this?
Well, it depends upon what you mean by cycle. If the cycle is in this life, if we really identify with our victim story and we're not going to let it go, then we are creating our own reality, and there's nothing anybody can do to help you but you have to realize that you have self-authority, and at some point you are doing this to yourself.
Woo-hoo.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I can say though that, and I am so excited to be able to share this, over the years my abilities have changed. The energy construct of the human that I perceive has changed. And the more I learn, the more I read, the more I study, the more I get certified, the more I call people and say, please take me off your website. I don't want, it's been nice, but I'm not going to do your style of healing anymore. The more I realize it's getting more simple and even simpler yet to heal. And if I had to recommend two things that could create profound change, the first one would be the Ho'oponopono prayer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. I've said it at times 200 times in a day. It raises your frequency exponentially if you say it 8 times, 13 times, however many times. I just got chills saying that, so it's important to share with you. The second thing is go into a sensory deprivation pod. Do a salt float once a week and call me in 6 or 7 weeks.
Oh,
Really?
Because doing a salt float, which is, by the way, 8 inches of water, depending on the size of the pod, it'll be 800 to 1,000 pounds of magnesium sulfate. That magnesium sulfate literally dissipates all distorted frequencies in your body. And it is equivalent, according to some energy healers, and I very much believe this is true, that one salt float is the equivalent of doing 50,000 Reiki sessions.
Oh.
So if you go to a Reiki healer and they charge you $145 a session, how much money would you have spent after you received 50,000 Reiki sessions?
Wow.
So what they
And
call
a
it,
salt float
Magnesium.
is $60.
Can you soak in your own bathtub? It's not
What you can do is go buy Epsom salt, like
Yeah.
the 5-pound bag.
Yeah.
Buy a couple of 5-pound bags, put 3 or 4 inches of water,
Yeah.
hot as you can stand, wrap a towel around yourself because you're not submerged. Don't drain the water when the water gets cool. Add hot water until you can't stand anymore. Then when it gets cool, add more hot water until you don't need the towel anymore, and you're in there for about an hour. And you can do it at home. But the thing is that by that time you will have spent more for Epsom salt than you would have if you went
If you just went to the
$60 for a 90-minute salt float, and they
Yeah.
have them right across the bridge. What do you remember the name? My husband and I were going to go.
I don't recall.
I heard they had one in Fairfax.
Root
Right.
something.
Had frogs?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that might be wrong.
Again, a Reiki session, and I'm a Reiki master. That's certified teacher, right?
Right.
When I didn't really want to become a Reiki master, but everybody said, what kind of healing do you do? What do you do? What are you certified in? And I thought, well, everything I do is far superior
Right.
to Reiki or anything else, because this is really puts the authority in your hands. We don't say I'm powerless over we don't give our power away to a healer. We say this energy exists in me, and I am, with love and compassion, sending it away and forgiving myself and dissolving or transmuting, whatever your language is, right? I had to find someone who was a Reiki master, who could truly see energy and feel energy, so that I could demonstrate to that person that I can spin energy all day long in your body and allow me to become certified without receiving the symbols
Right,
or the attunements that they say are so necessary.
right.
Because remember, they have access to energy in the universe that you don't.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's utterly ridiculous,
Yes.
right?
So you were looking for a framework.
I was just looking for a certification that was sort of ubiquitous, that
Yeah.
I could put on my website, that people would say, oh, she does Reiki. People call me for Reiki sessions all day long. I don't do Reiki.
Yeah.
But they feel energy moving there, feel a lot
Good enough.
better when, you know. I mean, one of the things, pardon me, I just feel as if when we do, there are many different types of people who do Reiki, so it's unfair of me to judge all Reiki masters.
No.
I am not in any way trying to point a finger
Yes,
at
I
every
understand.
person that does Reiki, because there are many, many talented people like myself who do much, much more than Reiki. And many people swear by Reiki and again would go fisticuffs with me
No, I've heard what
for
you're
saying
saying.
that. Does
in
that
other
make
places.
sense?
I've heard what you're saying in other places, so you're validating something I've already heard.
Yeah.
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 But what you are
And the-
recommending is
The
prayer.
salt bath
the
and the
salt bath.
Ho'oponopono prayer. 80% of everything can be resolved just by saying the Ho'oponopono prayer.
Do you say it with, do you just say it kind of just loosely because you know you're supposed to say it, or do you usually have something in mind that you feel like you want to address and
Both
do the
and.
prayer? Okay.
Both and. You can, if you have a struggle at work with a colleague, you can say it between you and that person. If you want to go deeper and you feel like maybe it's not this life, you just don't understand why this person doesn't like you, there's no reason, or why you walk in every time you walk into the room and someone's present, you get a really bad feeling, or you feel sick, or you get the creeps, and the person isn't a creepy person. It's a past life. So in that case, you call their past lives, or all soul aspects, as
Right.
I would in my language, all of their soul aspects, when you're sitting down for a quiet contemplation, and you call yourself and all your soul aspects, and you say the Ho'opono prayer for one another. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Then if you have a troubled relationship with a child, I have troubled relationship with a bipolar child, you can say the Ho'oponopono prayer for a specific relationship. You can say it, I say it often for every person who's ever lived on the planet,
Right.
for every soul that's ever existed. Anybody want to pray with me? Come on, everybody in the pool.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's
Yeah.
move humanity forward and evolve. But speaking of the evolution, I wanted to share that I have seen the energy construct change, and although people will say the number of chakras we have, there are more and more and more. At first we had 7, and then okay, this year we're going to have 12, and now we have 44, and there's even more than 51, and I don't know. I don't see chakras anymore. At a certain point, I stopped seeing chakras, and I started seeing the meridian system. So I had to go study the traditional Chinese meridian system and go to masters in that modality. And I asked them, will you take me on? Can I study with you? I'm happy to study with you. You don't need it. You already see it. You don't need to know where the points are on the body. You know where the energy is. You don't need me. So I would get turned away from people when I was perfectly willing to sit and learn all of the points. And I did go through quite a bit of that academically, but as soon as I mastered that, I didn't see the meridians anymore.
Right.
Then it was more focusing on the nervous system and beginning to understand why I was seeing it. And this year in February, when I saw the picture of the nerve changing from green to red, that was very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I don't even see, most often, I don't even see the physical body anymore. I see people, your heart energy, your divine light, the core of you, which energetically represents the nervous system, and I see the mind, if the heart and the mind have not merged. And oftentimes with the heart, it can be the heart of the soul the wounded heart, of the soul aspects. And at a certain point, a person will just be one light. It won't be separate, the mind, the heart, the divine light. It will be one light. And again, I don't see chakras that often anymore. The chakras gave way to like a rainbow corkscrew light, and the
Wow.
rainbow corkscrew turned into an opalescent core, and the opalescent core turned into a white core, and the white core turned into an iridescent golden core. And then I saw some people as an infinity symbol. And the way that I would see distortion and everything else, the thoughts, the memories, the emotions, whatever it was, would be little black dots or a lot of green energy or a lot of dark orange energy or that type of thing. And with the infinity symbol would get a little knot in it so that the energy wouldn't flow, and your heart will flutter, or you'll get a bit of a headache and you'll feel funny, you don't know why. It's because your energy isn't flowing. And so when we clear whatever that obstruction is, then the little knot goes away and the infinity symbol continues to flow. Well, the infinity symbol, now, so you know if you have a round rubber band, it's a circle, and you twist it, that becomes a figure eight or an infinity. Imagine the infinity symbol untwisting as if it were, and then I would see a vertical golden circle around people, above the head and below the feet, almost as if we're standing in a golden circle. And then that vertical circle gave way to what I can best describe as a hula hoop, a white circle at sternum height. And if you're a healer, it would have a baby blue tinge. If you're a teacher, it would have sort of a pastel orange. If your job is solely just to walk around and ground unconditional love on the planet, it would be like a rose pink, right? And at some point during that process, the ego, the inner child, all of it, everything that's anchoring that, which is all fear, right? The ego it's all about fear, inner child, all about fear. All of that goes away. So the whole energy construct of what we used to perceive in New Age mysticism as the human has completely given way to a new way of being, a new energy. Most people are completely unaware of it. The preponderance of people that I see with this beautiful new energy are just innocent, sweet, lovey, clueless people who've never read a spiritual book. They're just happy, go lucky, and they've never had to do all this hard work that the rest of us have had to do.
Right.
And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing because it's very heartening to know that there are people out there anchoring this love on the planet while the rest of us are struggling to, help everybody. Yes, sir.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, I'm impressed by, how do you think of yourself as a forgiver? Do you feel like you're kind of an expert at that? Because it sounds to me like that's a lot of forgiving from when, you started relating to personal, so it seems to me it's okay for me to ask this. The other thing I'm impressed with, which is a puzzlement to me, is, why weren't you just in an abusive relationship? I mean, how did you end up with what seems to be a pretty good husband? I mean, from what I can see.
I do what I can.
Well, a couple things. That answer is kind of a complicated answer. I mean, I feel, and I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but I have a sense that his job, his mission, has been keeping me grounded. Because all he's ever done, he never thinks of himself. Never thinks of his wants, his desires. He's telling me to cool it. He has supported me, and so my sense, I don't know this for a fact, and I haven't really asked it, I've been on a trajectory to sort of heal myself. I haven't gone into our relationship because there haven't necessarily been struggles that we've had to overcome. In that way, we've obviously, every marriage has struggles. Please don't hear me say that we have a perfect marriage, or have, for 24 years.
Well, if I may interrupt, what's hard for me to understand is how you come from a very abusive, the opposite of nurturing family, where I would think somebody's self-esteem would be just grounded in nothing.
Yes.
And how do you, what happened so that you were able to, be who you are now with your relationships that you have now. It seems to me quite extraordinary. It's not an aha moment for me. Oh, sure, that's how that happened for you.
Okay, well, first, you did come a little bit late, so I did say in the beginning that I really wasn't a very nice person when I was younger. I was pretty self-centered. I thought I had it all figured out. And I was selfish. And I put my needs and my career over the needs of my husband and my children. And my relationship with my children suffers because of that. So by no means was I unscathed. By no means.
Have you forgiven the
Yes. And this work helps you to identify your triggers and your thought process and address them one at a time and send forgiveness, and like magic, one day you wake up and you just don't have that negative thought anymore. You just don't have that nagging memory anymore. You just don't feel angry anymore. You're not bitter anymore. You don't cringe when you hear a person's name anymore. And you just change. It doesn't happen overnight, but I am a shining example
Yes.
of how things can change significantly over the course of just a couple of years. And I will say that my husband is one of the most patient people I know. He works in IT in the legal industry. 95% of his customers, he manages like a mid-sized IT firm, and 95% of their customers are law firms. And if you can imagine attorneys and legal administrators and IT professionals in that industry are very demanding, because it is a very there's security concerns, data concerns, the programs that, it is confidential information. You're dealing with the courts, you're dealing with financial institutions. It's very, very, very stressful job. And my husband he is the perfect person to work with upset people, to work in that environment. He has the patience of unparalleled patience. So maybe that will give you some senses too.
Thank you.
Yep.
So before you were talking about how you said people would fight to hang on to this idea of karma
Yes.
disappearing,
Right.
But you said that you can get connected to the distinguishing, letting it go, or just
Right.
casting it away.
Well, I
Kinda
want to be careful, because I don't want to necessarily. I am pretty much discounting a lot of theory. There are so many people that would stand up here and tell you that they know how the universe works. I'm not saying that. I don't know how or why the universe works the way it does, but I can tell you with absolute surety that forgiveness will get you off of the wheel of karma. It will. And there are people who insist that the universe has to stay in balance, and the way it stays in balance is that if you've done something wrong, you must suffer for it. And if that is the way the universe works, then I'm starting a grassroots effort right now, a universal committee, to change the way that the universe, because that's just darn wrong.
Yeah.
And I absolutely believe that. And I absolutely believe that forgiveness is the answer to everything. Love is a universal solvent.
Yes.
Go ahead. Then you go ahead.
Could I ask you to say a tiny bit more about the frequency shift that goes with soaking in the very intensive, concentrated magnesium?
I believe that as we raise our consciousness, our frequency as a biodynamic or morphogenic being rises, but we have so much distortion and lower vibrational frequencies, anger, guilt, grief, resentment, distrust, you name it, right? I mean, hundreds of emotions, all born from fear in our body, that it would be years and years for us to identify every one individually and clear them. The magnesium sulfate dissipates in some way, interacts with the lower frequencies, and either pulls them out or transmutes them. I'm not a scientist, so I cannot say what happens. I know that there is not a lot of residue left over in the pod or the room, because I can see energy, and I've gone into places, and I've gone into a room and walked right out and said, cancel my float, you got an entity in there, or something's going on, you need to use a Tibetan singing bowl, or tuning fork, or you need to use
You have seen that or have not?
I have. So there are sometimes things that come off of people and we don't realize it, and it gets left behind. But 95% of the time there is not a lot of residue. The magnesium sulfate somehow transmutes those energies.
So can you just say one or two examples of what you've seen about a transformation from someone doing this, like you said, for 6 months, once a week? What have you seen personally in terms of patterns or changes? in
A
people?
salt float or
Yeah.
the work?
The salt float.
I know a young woman who had a chronic anxiety from the time she was young, and on her 7th salt float, she left the salt float and she didn't have anxiety anymore. I'm trying to think of another profound one. There was a young man, I believe, who had some anger issues, and I'm certain that it wasn't him that was angry. There was some sort of a non-physical being, and that non-physical being was no longer there after a number of floats. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but I don't think he realized that's what it was. I can see energetically that that's what it was. There have been a lot of cases where people they almost become angelic. They have a glow about them. Their voice lightens. They can't explain it. And again, these people fall into the category of not really trying, don't really understand what's happening. Maybe they work at the salt float place. They don't realize what's happening to them. But all of a sudden they start getting messages from spirit, and all these synchronicities start happening, and relationships start getting better. Yeah. Yeah.
Schedule my weeklies.
You're welcome.
Have you personally tried the salt flow?
Yes, I have. I want to say I've done it 5 or 6 times. There are many people who do it much more frequently, sometimes twice a week. I travel quite a bit. I work with horses. I'm not always in a urban setting where they have places like that, and so. But when I do get an opportunity, I was just in Seattle, Washington. I was in Portland, Oregon, and I went into Portland and did a float. When I was in Seattle, I did a float. At home, my husband took me a month ago down to Sedona, and I did a float. So I do them when I can, but it's hasn't really been as frequent as I would like. We're thinking of doing one while we're here.
What do you feel the changes? Are there any changes, or just feel relaxing or energized?
Well, people actually get visions in the float, and I've actually seen my energy shift because I am very aware of what my energy looks like. I have actually seen my energy change in the float and in the process of changing.
The magnesium probably is serve as the iron channel gate opener, so that would definitely change the energy. I think that's affects people for soaking in there.
Oh,
She's Tian's a Chinese medical doctor, that's
Oh,
what Tian's relating
beautiful.
to, she's from that.
right. And I haven't studied a lot of the terminology. I didn't get real in depth. So I don't
Yeah.
have the same lexicon that you have, but I understand what you're saying.
Is there much risk for the carryover of the previous person that let go of something?
There is little risk, and that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
The magnesium sulfate generally takes care of things, but I do caution people that own floats that they should use a Tibetan singing bowl or tuning
Right.
forks or something in between, because I have gone in and said, whoa,
Yeah.
we're going to do a little ceremony out here in the waiting in the area, because there's something in that room and I'm not going in there. Yeah, so.
Have you working with some suicidal patient?
Yes, I have worked with a couple of people who have been suicidal, especially veterans. Yes.
Do you have seen the common pattern or what it causes? Or due to maybe they killed somebody or been
I don't think there's any one way to answer that.
Mhm.
And of course, I am not a doctor, but I can tell you things that I have seen in people that are suicidal or have suicidal thoughts. I oftentimes see memories in different energetic forms. One is almost like a teardrop. Certain memories will be stored in what looks like a little crystalline teardrop, and a lot of memories are stored on the optic nerve, having to do with sight or seeing or perceiving, or the unwillingness to see or perceive the truth and that type of thing. Does that make sense? Oftentimes people who have suicidal thoughts, the memories are and the thought pattern is very jagged, and sometimes energetically it looks to me as if it's sitting there waiting, almost like a time bomb waiting to go off. Does that make sense?
Do you see some like an entity?
A lot of times, yes. If I go near a bar where they serve alcohol, or I'm at a party where there is alcohol, you can actually see a person standing and an entity, a non-physical entity, go into the person and their eyes change and they'll start to become very boisterous and oftentimes aggressive, and they'll just order more drinks and more drinks. So beings who have passed on that were alcoholics will hang out in places such as bars so that they can kick out the soul that's in the body and come in and feel that state of,
Drunkenness?
yes.
Addicts from
Yeah.
the other side.
There's a lot of that, and these are not conversations that, I'm concerned actually about this being on YouTube. These are not conversations that we have with just average people on the street.
No.
This is some advanced, conversation, because I'm not trying to foment fear.
Yes.
These are just energies that exist. I see them. I know a lot of people who see this.
So the whole addiction, so the people that are really struggling with addiction are really being marauded?
Some, not
Some
all.
are. Okay, some are.
Some, this might sound strange, but you may very well relate to this. People that have candida or a lot of parasitic activity, that opens us up to lower astral energies. And so many people have candida and aren't aware.
I was
So,
just gonna ask you about sugar.
Smoking, drinking, medication, any kind of addiction, whether it's food or sugar, and it is an addiction.
Yeah,
It is an addiction, make no mistake.
Yeah.
All of that is keeping us in patterns, no matter what we're addicted to.
Oh,
Coffee?
Well, I mean, generally, I would say caffeine is probably not. You know, if you're gonna do 95% of the work, why not go the last 5% and not, you know? I myself have a cup of black tea every morning. I'm in that. Why not do that? And how many times have we thrown away all the tea in the house, honey?
A couple of times, yeah.
I've tried.
We
It's
tried.
it's
hard.
it's my one last
Right, me too.
comfort. Every morning I have a cup of tea. But it's hard. It's hard. It's just like it's so very, very hard not to eat meat when you crave protein. It's very, very hard. And I can't, how many times have we tried to stop eating meat? Oh my gosh, a dozen.
Is it really important to do that?
You know, I'm not so sure that it's as important not to eat meat as important it is to be grateful for the meat that we are eating and to bless the life of the animal that was sacrificed and to intend that it will nurture your body when you eat it. Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm no expert on anything. I am probably dangerous in that I know a little tiny bit about a lot of things.
Can you say more about sugar?
Yeah, I can. I appreciate. I hear you.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't, you know, I'm not a nutritionist. I have thought about maybe studying it.
well, from an energetic point of view.
From an
it's,
energetic, well, I've
yeah.
never looked at it that way, but I'd be happy to look at it if. I feel that, well, first of all, the first thing I was reminded of is that sugar feeds cancer cells. So mutated cells are fed by sugar. That's the first thing energetically I get. The human body the human body should not ingest sugar. That's all I'm.
I was hoping you could say, well, if you are grateful for it and you bless it, maybe it'll be okay.
So so I'm hearing it creates an imbalance. Okay. I think there's a lot of talk about this, and again, I'm not a nutritionist, and I don't study all these different diets, and I don't want to be disrespectful by calling them fad diets, but right now ketogenics is very popular, or a high protein, low carb diet is very popular, right? What Spirit just said is that when we eat a lot of sugar, or for example, bread products, processed food, white flour, white sugar, somehow a mechanism gets turned off in our brain, and rather than burning fat as fuel for the body begins to burn sugar as fuel. So all the fat we eat, and you know, many of us are gaining weight now because our body is burning sugar as a source of fuel and not fat. I don't know that medically, that's just what I just heard.
Okay.
Yes.
Does that,
I've
but
heard
it's
that.
in alignment with what they're talking about, turning the body's natural process to burn fat. But I have to also say with that I do know, at least know this much, and that is that there are certain fats, omegas, like coconut oil and that type, that the brain needs to function. And some of the brain fog, not all, but some of the brain fog and some of the memory loss is because we are not getting the good fat. We're not getting, it feels like somebody's touching me on my head. I think there must be some sort of spirit here or something. Anyway, sorry, do you? Yeah, something's happening. It felt like somebody was going like that to me.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, you were
I think
just
you were
talking
talking
about
about
food for
fat.
the brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You probably, again, you know, you should be standing up here talking
I
because,
don't want to take
and you know, but let me just honor you and say that on my website I do shiatsu massage. So when I do shiatsu massage, I tap into the nervous system of the body through the points. There's a story, it's not a story, it's the history of Chinese medicine, that in the olden days, a few hundred years ago, that Chinese medicine professionals, and it's Oriental medicine, I don't mean to be disrespectful, traditional Oriental medicine professionals would be assigned to serve a village or a certain region, and they would be paid for their work. But if one of the people that they served became ill, they wouldn't be paid. It was their job to ensure that they get that person back into balance and figure out why they became ill. This is real. The body being out of balance and the way the energy flow, I mean, it is very, very real. But we have so many other influences on the body, Wi-Fi, cell phones, you know, all kinds of radiation from so many sources, eating glyphosate. We are literally eating Roundup every day at every meal. We are just so toxic. So the body really doesn't have a chance. The lymphatic system does not have a chance either to carry the waste out or let alone bring the hydration, bring the water to our brain and other parts of the body that we need. And again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I really know very, very little about this, but these are the types of things that I can perceive, and so, or I received, you know, some level of message about, so I can share a little bit. But you should be the one
Yes.
up here talking about.
Do you have recommendations on the hydration end of things? Because you see that people are often highly dehydrated.
Yes, and what I wanted to say is what I forgot to mention earlier is heavy metal toxicity is so prevalent right now, and that also contributes to a lot of the imbalance for people. I think that we need to detox our kidneys and our liver. We have to pay very special care to that. We need to do colon hydrotherapy to clear out the colon so that the body can purge and absorb nutrients as needed. I would say that even fasting for a couple of days, if you fast for 3 days, you completely reset your immune system. But again, I'm not a doctor, so I can't recommend a fast. That would not be good, or, you know,
Right.
Especially if anybody has any health concerns. You know, a raw diet, raw juicing, you know, ginger, turmeric, all of these things, you know, just do the best we can, eat as healthy as we can. People that say everything in moderation, I'm not 100% sure that's the best way to go, because that's usually an excuse to cheat once or twice a day. You know, it's more really a lifestyle choice. But again, you know, there's so much information out there, and I just don't have access to it.
Have you working with people like a dying people?
In hospice, I
yeah,
have
sort of.
I have not worked with people in hospice, but a lot of people that come to the near-death experience sharing groups that I'm a part of are hospice nurses. I have friends who are therapists in hospice. I know a lot of people who have worked for many, many years in hospice, or who have been emergency room or ICU nurses who have been around death and dying quite a bit, but I myself have not been exposed to that. I've heard a lot of stories, but.
Do you have a feeling about earthly future?
I don't. A lot of people do, and many of the stories are so conflicting. I feel that I have never been given guidance beyond today, and I think that people that do get guidance are very lucky. I'm not sure that if anybody says they know exactly, you know, is the universe electric, is the universe holographic, you know, quantum theory, and you know, I just don't know. I shy away from people who are certain they know exactly what will happen. Because I feel that the minute we believe we have all the answers, all the doors are closed to us and we stop growing. And I've met a lot of people who've been doing the same thing for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, and the world is changing. People are changing, you know. So I don't have any answers. I certainly hope that there are some of the bad things that some people say are going to happen don't happen. But the best thing you can do, in my opinion, and the best thing I can do, is be as joyful and purposeful and mindful as we can every day. Live your passion, live your purpose, be happy, be kind, hope for the best, believe that the best will happen. And how can that not happen? Because if we are truly creating our own reality, that is what will happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Those were some amazing questions. I appreciate you. And you know, there's a Hindu saying namaste.
Namaste.
And to me, what that means literally is the universal spark in me recognizes the universal spark in you. We are the same. And when I look at people energetically, we are the same. We have the same energy. Especially people that come to these types of meetings.
This has been great.
Thank you.